In Conference with Michael Jackson is proudly brought to you by UniqueSpeakerBureau.com, South Africa's preferred professional speaker bureau. A very good evening and welcome to In Conference with Michael Jackson right here on your favorite radio station, Mix 93.8 FM. If you're a regular listener to the show, you'll know exactly what it's all about. If, however, you're just joining us for the first or second time, let me remind you I'm a conference speaker around the world. I've been called one of the busiest speakers in the world. I'm not sure that's true, but I certainly work a lot. The joy of what I do, though, brings me to this program because you get to meet the people that I meet along my world of travels. Authors, bloggers, multimillionaires, thought leaders extraordinaire, business gurus. And we just thought it would be really cool if you could get up close and personal with them here on your favorite radio station as well. Tonight being no exception. And by way of introduction to my guest, Stef Plessis, this evening, you've probably gathered from his name that he's a local lad, although I'm not sure Stef is local. I mean, he's worked probably more around the world than I have in my life. He's a founder member of the Professional Speakers Association in South Africa. He's a much sought-after business consultant. He's a guru in the fields of employee engagement and workplace culture, and frankly, it's a joy to have him on my show. Good evening, Stef. How are you, mate?
Hello, Michael. You are so enthusiastic. You make me happy.
I'm glad to hear it.
Nice to be on your show.
It's a pleasure to have you. What's it like being called a guru? I mean, you're probably used to that now anyway, right?
Michael, you're one of the very few people anywhere that call me a guru. But you are right that I work with companies around the world. I've worked with some of the world's biggest brands. And I help them to get their people on board, on track, looking in the same direction, and then help them to achieve their strategic objectives. Help them to build a culture that will get people to do what they said they were going to do.
Now, where did all this start for you?
There are two parts to it. So let's back up 1 second. Remember that I engage employees, get people on board, on track. That's a motivational, inspirational domain. I'm not very keen of the word motivational, but it's a motivational, inspirational domain. And that's how I started out doing what I'm doing now, 25 years almost ago. Off the back of a very successful career in sales, I was invited to speak at a sales conference, then South Africa's biggest sales conference. It was meant to be a once-off talk, but it overnight turned into a career. So for a decade or so, in the 90s, I was mostly focused on helping people to get more of what they want. And then I met my current business partner, Steve Simpson, around the turn of the century. Steve is an Australian guy, creator of a unique, now acclaimed concept called UGRs, Unwritten Ground Rules. And that's the culture part of our world. And over the past 15 years or so, Steve and I have evolved that concept together. That's where the two domains come from.
So ostensibly, would you have called yourself a motivational speaker in the early days?
From the very early days, Michael, I was probably more of a inspirational speaker. But it's a very fine distinction, and people here at home are less familiar with the phrases than perhaps in the States. I was trying from the early days to back a little way away from the pure feel-good message and trying to add a bit of value, which is why I went out and got myself an education, why I got a master's degree in personal and professional leadership so that I could add a bit of real value. So today I'm more into, beyond getting people excited, I'm more into helping them to actually do the things that are necessary to facilitate lasting change through long-term ongoing interaction, so that I'm doing less and less of once-off engagements and working with organizations more and more over the last 15 years on an ongoing basis. And it needs to be sustained. Michael, you know better than anyone else. People leave the event and then life gets in the way.
Sure. And that's, I guess, why motivational speakers have fallen into a bit of disrepute in that context, because it's almost as if they're going to tell ostriches they can fly to work and they get all excited on the Friday afternoon, but come Monday morning they drive because they're ostriches.
But that said, let's not forget that we are spoiled for choice in South Africa with really good speakers, especially motivational speakers. There are great guys on the circuit. There are guys who I respect immensely on the circuit. You know everyone in the business, but Ian Thomas and Quentin Coetzee and Gavin Sharples are some of the old stalwarts, and they do amazing work. bringing that very necessary facet to organizations where they get people engaged and excited. And that's a really important part of the journey. That's where it starts. So you can't do what I do for organizations if you don't do that step first. Now, I'm really fortunate that I have the skill set and the capacity to do both of those steps. But you start with that. So yeah, there's a definite need within organizations for engaging with high-end, call it then motivational speakers. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the culture work. Shall I do that? So on the culture side, this thing called UGRs, Unwritten Ground Rules, we think that organizations live or die by their culture. We think that culture eats strategy for breakfast. We think that you can have whatever plans you want in place. If the culture within your organization does not exist for people to embrace action, to embrace accountability, to do the things that they are meant to be doing, then your strategy is dead in the water. Now, that's not a new insight. There probably isn't a listener to your show who doesn't know that. And right now they're going like, duh, tell us something we don't know. So here's maybe a part of what fewer people know, and that is that leaders everywhere know what I've just shared with you, but most of them will admit that they don't really know how to manage culture in practical and simple terms. And another fact is that very few organizations, Michael, I've worked with dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds, but let's call it dozens and dozens of organizations around the world. I've done 3,500 engagements with clients. I know that organizations do not typically drive culture as a strategic objective. Yet it is the thing that will cause them to fail or succeed. So this concept of UGRs changes all of that, and it changes it for the good, pun intended. What it does is help us to understand what it is that drives our culture, the unwritten ground rules. Those unspoken behaviors that manifest in organizations, like, for instance, somebody thinking to themselves, around here, there's no use giving input at a meeting because nobody takes me seriously. Or maybe somebody saying to themselves, the only time I get spoken to by my boss is when I do something wrong. Or maybe someone is saying to themselves, around here, when things go wrong, everyone just covers their own tracks.
And those are fairly common statements.
Absolutely. Well, they never spoken, Michael. They're not spoken. They only spoken through the side of the mouth after the meeting, in the famous meeting after the meeting. You know those well, don't you?
I certainly do.
Okay. So they're only spoken of in the meeting after the meeting, and they're spoken of in the passages, in the hallways, in the change rooms, in the pub after work. But they never really addressed. And a new employee will see those signs immediately, their first day on job. They'll see who parks where, the consequence of parking in the wrong place. They'll see whether people at reception look happy or not. They'll see whether they have an email address ready waiting for them the way that they were promised. They'll sit in their first meeting and see who makes eye contact with whom, what happens when the boss leaves the room or enters the room, what gets said after we make the commitment that we will execute, and so on and so on. I could go on for hours with that. But in the 15 minutes you have, that's enough. Now, a new employee, because they want to fit in, will start behaving in a way congruent with those unwritten ground rules. Does that make sense?
It certainly does.
And that being the case, it is the unwritten ground rules that create the culture by which we live or die, business speaking wise, in terms of results. Another manifestation is the accepted fact that very few organizations do what they said they were going to do in budget and on time. Michael, you've worked with hundreds of organizations. Would you buy that?
Everything you're saying is music to my ears, and it makes perfect sense.
If that is true, then what we need to do is change the behaviors that is driving our culture. And we do that by changing the UGRs. So there are 5 simple steps that your listeners can implement, and they can do this by themselves. In step number 1, they have to be crystal clear about the future that they want and the associated cultural attributes necessary to achieve that success. Step number 2, they have to determine what are the existing prevailing current, sorry for the repeat there, UGRs that are driving the behaviors of their people. They do that by observing, they do that by asking, and they do that through something that we call a UGRs stock take. Anyone out there want to do that, look me up. Stef Plessis, easy to find, all over the internet. Or even better, speak to Paul at Unique Speakers Bureau. He'll get hold of me instantly. It's probably better speaking to Paul at USB, Unique Speakers Bureau, because it's easier to get hold of him on the other side of a phone than it is to get hold of me. And he has my schedule right in front of him. So in step 2, we do this thing called the UGRs stock take, and we determine exactly what people's unwritten ground rules are by asking them questions. I'm going to give you 2 examples quickly. I want to assess the levels of accountability, which I determined in step 1 was a key cultural attribute. You happy with that?
Yeah, got it.
I ask people questions like, around here, when someone says they will do something, ... and I get people to complete the sentence. Or I get them to complete the sentence around here when something goes wrong, ...
So it's a bit of a climate audit, really, question 2.
100%. Yeah, but it's better than a climate audit because it gives you specific insight, quantitative and qualitative, to what exactly it is that is driving the results that you're achieving right now.
I like that.
So we analyze that. We work with a client, get them to analyze that. And now they understand what it is that is driving their culture, and they understand what the burning issues are, and they understand what it is they need to change. Step number 3, you teach people about UGRs. It's a really simple concept. It's not hard to do. After I've run through these 5 steps, if I have time, I'll tell you a little anecdote that will help people to understand it exactly. But you teach people about the concept. Step number 4, you engage people in identifying what the positive UGRs are that need to be in place to achieve your end game. That's not a hard thing to do. The key is to engage your people, because people only support that which they hope to create. I bet you found that. In your work, I bet you have found that people only support, or that they support best, that which they hope to create.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Step number 5, we have to embed these new positive UGRs. We have to drive behavior, and there has to be consequence for non-compliance. People have to embrace this, take accountability. We assess people, we do 360. So everything we do nowadays can be measured, it's assessed. And we're at a point where people pay us only if we show them results. Like that. That's how sure we are of the process. And it hasn't failed us yet.
That's a hell of a claim, though, Stef.
Yeah, well, okay, so let me clarify that quickly. And I don't want to eat into the limited time we have, but I don't want that to sound arrogant. Steve and I are very specific on only taking work that we are really well suited for. We only work in environments where we think we can contribute. We only work with clients after multiple engagements in terms of briefings and meetings. And if we can't deliver on what they want or need, we will tell them so, and we'll direct them to where they can find it. So by the time I have taken on work with a client, we are pretty sure that our processes, our insights, our mechanisms, our online deliveries, our multi-year follow-on 2 weekly video deliveries, we are pretty sure then that what we have on offer, our assessments, that it will solve what that client thinks that they're engaging us for. And then it's not a hard claim to make, because then you just live up to what you said that you were going to do. Does that make better sense?
It certainly does make sense. Now, you've been doing this for some amazing businesses, large and medium-sized, small as well. Yeah. Stef, where do you draw the line? Does it have to be something that you're keen to work on, or can anyone approach you in this regard?
What we do costs. So I work as much as I can with NGOs, with organizations who are aimed at a cause. I'm very keen on whenever there's an opportunity working with the police or the military, with government, and obviously at very reduced or at no rates. But I'm not at a point anymore where I can take on projects that don't pay for themselves. So that would mean that typically I work with organizations that employ upward of 10,000 people. But I have clients on my books who have 30, 40, and 50 employees. And then I go out of my way to try and create opportunities to help them as well. You asked, and I haven't answered you. Back up quickly. Your question was? It's going to be funny if you don't remember either.
No, my question was based on the size, and I think you've answered that well enough in terms of the fact that you've got to approach certain customers.
Yeah, so I can share with you the names of some of our customers, but typically I'm contractually bound to not advertise who I work with. But for instance, presently we're working with a very large bank in 26 countries. They work in more than 26 countries, but we are working with them in 26 countries. That gives you some idea of the scope of the type of stuff we're doing. If I look at the clock, we have maybe a minute to go. How do you want to wrap this up?
I'll give you 2 minutes. I want to just focus on this top South African stuff. Your proud, homegrown South African talent. We in this country are good enough to work all over the world. You're living proof of that.
Yeah, but people here at home think if you have an accent, that maybe you know more. And there's a flip side to that. You know, as I do, that in the other countries where we work, because we have an accent, they think that we know more. But I'll tell you this. I've worked around the world with many of the world's top presenters, consultants, and speakers. I have heard whoever there is to hear at the top end of our game. And some of the very best talent is right here, living in the Rainbow Nation, homegrown, homebred, people that are here and accessible and don't cost international rates. If you look at the top end of our game here, Michael, the guys are any bit as good as the top end guys anywhere else in the world. And I think that slowly, in our industry at least, among consultants, speakers, trainers, educators, they are recognizing that we have amazing talent here. And I think our clients know that.
I think it's superb, and I couldn't agree with you more. Now, for the guys listening to the show, driving home from work right now, who are maybe stuck in a bit of a routine, stuck in a bit of a rut, not sure what to do for themselves, can't call you and hire you because they're not responsible for the budget, what last bit of advice would you give somebody who's driving home in the traffic right now, who really wants to get more out of their own business, but feels like they're stuck in a rut?
And I have how long to answer that?
30 seconds.
Are you kidding me, right? Michael, I think you accept that people intrinsically, a human condition is that people want to do meaningful work. I think we just need to unlock the potential of our people. I think our people care about the businesses that they work in. I think that people want to leave a legacy. What we do is have to deliver authentic leadership, a type of leadership that causes people to choose to want to be more like us. We need to demonstrate behaviors that cause people to stop dead in their tracks and say, oh my gosh, I want to be more like that person. Then they will start emulating those behaviors. And then you would have facilitated change that is lasting and that will transcend your lifetime because it's bigger than you. I think that's what we do as a starting point. Sorry if that sounded glib.
So like moths to a flame, look for the guys. No, it doesn't sound glib in the slightest. And I think like moths to a flame, what I would add to that is that look for the people who are winning in your organization and get bloody close to them and find out why.
Well, maybe I'll bow out with this. It was Viktor Frankl, the great existentialist, who said that you can unleash the potential of another human being through the mere act of believing in them. I think believing in someone is not a consequence of their past behavior. I think it is a consequence of choice. I think there are many people in organizations in whom their leaders no longer believe because they've let them down in the past or whatever. I think if we elect to believe in our people, I think if we demonstrate real, authentic leadership, and if we make visible the right behaviors, I think that we have enough people in every organization that would want to follow suit because they want to give more meaning to their lives and their works. Michael, it was great chatting with you. If anyone wants to get hold of me, Google me or call Paul at USB, Unique Speakers Bureau.
We've been trying to get together on the show, you and I, Stef, for months and months and months, right? It's been a real pleasure. I hate the fact that it's 15 minutes. If you want to know how good Stef du Plessis is, just Google his name. That's the key thing. A real pleasure having you on the show, sir. You'll come back again in the future, I hope. We're just out of time. It's one of those worst things possible.
This was cool. Thank you.
A real pleasure. Stef du Plessis, thank you, and good night, sir.
Sure.
You've been listening to In Conference with Michael Jackson. That man is an absolute legend. That's the caliber of guest we want to bring you on the show. That's what you expect now from Mix. Legendary radio. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thanks from Stef, and thanks from me.
Mix.
In Conference with Michael Jackson was proudly brought to you by UniqueSpeakerBureau.com, South Africa's preferred professional speaker bureau.